Are National Guard troops set to be deployed into other big cities? Maybe, maybe not. We'll explain. Released, reunited, then rearrested. The latest on the fate of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And we welcome Katie Miller to the podcasting wars. How the former spokeswoman for DOGE and Elon Musk is encouraging women to have it all, whether they're conservative or liberal. Welcome to this Monday serving of the Takeout. I'm Ed O'Keefe in for Major Garrett, who's enjoying some well-earned time off. 3 times today, the president convened reporters and said many things. He talked about the deployment of National Guard troops in Washington, D.C. We'll have more on that in a moment. He talked about his new executive order on flag burning. We'll also discuss that, and how he wants his administration to cut more deals to take large stakes in big corporations. And that he's spoken again to Vladimir Putin, but he didn't specify when or about what. And that he's likely to file lawsuits soon challenging the proposed congressional redistricting of California. But 3 times today, he also discussed his plans to rename the Department of Defense back to its original name, the Department of War.
We won the World War I, World War II. It was called the Department of War. And to me, that's really what it is. Its defense is a part of that. But I have a feeling we're going to be changing. I'm talking to the people. Everybody likes that. We had an unbelievable history of victory when it was Department of War. Then we changed it to Department of Defense.
So he's right that for the first 158 of the nation's 249 years, it was known as the Department of War. Not until 1949 was it officially renamed, when after 2 globe-rattling world wars, leaders wanted to abandon any discussion of war when describing civilian leadership of the military. So why revert back? Well, because this is a president uniquely focused on look, imagery, branding. He's redecorated the Oval Office, after all, announced plans for a new White House ballroom, has spent considerable time discussing the quality of grass around Washington while removing it from the Rose Garden. He's focused on picking paint and carpet samples for a renovation of the Kennedy Center, and now the name of the Department of Defense. It's part of his remaking, some might say reverting, the federal government, the nation, and Washington to his liking. Speaking of remaking Washington to his liking, let's turn to CBS's Jake Rosen, who's here and is closely tracking the ongoing deployment of the National Guard across Washington. Today, Jake, good to see you. The Attorney General announced that there have been now more than 1,000 arrests by federal law enforcement across the city since the federal takeover began almost 2 weeks ago. Put that in context. Do we have any sense if it's more or less about the same of what was going on before?
Well, context is everything, Ed, because it's a little bit difficult to know, because when you add up these numbers that we're being told, about 45% of those Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said at today in the Oval Office are actually immigration-related arrests, whether or not somebody actually committed a crime or not, or what in the city, violent crime like the Trump administration says they're focused on, or simply is here illegally. That is kind of not that's factored into what the Trump administration is selling. Usually around this time of the year in D.C., there's about 50 arrests a night. If you kind of take those numbers out, it's not out of the realm of possibility that these are accurate. But the Metropolitan Police Department here is also doing arrests separate from federal law enforcement.
Oh, they are?
They are. And some of these patrols that are moving around the city are no different than they would be, let's just say, earlier this month before the federal takeover happened. But if there's a federal law enforcement officer present at the scene of these arrests, then it becomes tacked into these tallies. So it's difficult for us to know for sure. But again, reminder that this kind of door opening that the federal administration has taken here has allowed them to come in and do these ICE arrests, in addition to that, which also not just pads these numbers, but accomplishes an administration priority as well.
In part because when the federal takeover happened, they then compelled the mayor's office, the police chief, to revoke their so-called sanctuary city status and instead cooperate with federal agents, which had not been the case here. Now, look, President's also, of course, eyeing potential crackdowns in other cities, most notably Chicago. He talked about this today. Take a listen.
We're ready to go anywhere. We have a full complement of great human beings. We're full. You know, our military is full. We were way empty 1 year ago. Now we're full. So we can go anywhere on less than 24 hours notice.
Do we have any sense of whether deployments in other cities would mirror the D.C. playbook?
It's certainly possible, but I think it's best to remind people of what things looked like in Los Angeles earlier this year, when there was an immediate lawsuit challenging the deployment, saying that the situation had not reached a point that merits presidential authority. A judge that leaned liberal in California temporarily blocked it for about 12 hours, that deployment, and an appeals court came in and said that the president actually does have the authority to put troops in these cities. I think, and really what ended up being the longer-term move in Los Angeles was protecting these federal immigration and officers, HSI, FBI, as they move throughout the city with ICE to make these immigration arrests, protect federal buildings, and that would be certainly one way that he can do it legally. But again, D.C. is very unique, as our viewers are coming to learn, that the president has control of our National Guard. Nobody in district leadership, including our mayor or police chief, has actual control. So it's possible that he can find a way to do this for a significant amount of time.
In other places, of course, the appeals court opinions might be with the variation. What they said in California is one thing. What they say in the Midwest might be something different. All right, Jake Rosen, you'll be there tracking it all for us. We appreciate it. Another big focus for the Trump administration is, of course, immigration. And one of the better-known faces and cases symbolizing that push to more strictly enforce immigration laws is Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The Department of Homeland Security says he's once again back in federal custody, this time being processed for deportation to Uganda. Immigration and Customs Enforcement took him into custody in Baltimore earlier today after releasing him last weekend. Before turning himself in today, Abrego Garcia spoke through a translator outside that ICE facility.
And I want you to remember this. Remember that I am free, and I was able to be reunited with my family.
Camilo Montoya Galvez joins us now from Baltimore outside that ICE facility. Camilo, what is the current status of Abrego Garcia?
Well, according to his lawyers, Abrego Garcia is back in ICE custody in Virginia, held at the detention center there in that state because Maryland does not have any long-term ICE detention centers. And as you underscored, Ed, the Department of Homeland Security has said that this man from El Salvador is now being processed for deportation to Uganda. We reported last week that the administration had brokered an agreement with this country in East Africa so that country would take back migrants and deportees who are not their citizens. This is one of the latest third country deportation deals that this administration has been able to forge with different countries around the globe, including in Africa. And now this man is facing deportation to Africa even before his criminal trial starts next year. Because again, the only reason, Ed, that Kilmar Abrego Garcia was brought back to the U.S. in early June after a month of refusal by the Trump administration was so he could face federal charges related to human smuggling. The Justice Department is alleging that he transported undocumented immigrants from Maryland to different parts of the country and from Texas to different states like Maryland. He could very well be deported before that criminal trial starts.
He could, but a judge stepped in today and said he can't go right away, right?
That's correct. A federal judge here in Maryland, agreeing with the lawsuit filed just this morning by Abrego Garcia's lawyers, halted that deportation to Uganda for the time being. However, it is very important to underscore that Abrego Garcia did cross into the U.S. illegally back in 2011 and does have an active deportation order. He has a protection from being deported to El Salvador, but technically speaking, it is possible for the administration to try to deport him to another country, but obviously that is also now being litigated by federal courts across the country.
And real quick, he's not going to Uganda, it sounds like, anytime soon, but do we know what would await him should he gets there? Is it some kind of facility they've set up? Could his family or attorney come to visit him? Is he free to move about the country? What's the status of someone who gets sent there?
It really is unclear, Ed. The Trump administration has not disclosed many details about this potential deportation to Uganda. What it has said is that Uganda is willing to accept this man in its territory. We do know that Costa Rica also offered to grant refugee status to Kilmar Abrego Garcia as part of a plea deal, but that was rejected by his attorneys.
All righty. Camilo Montoya Galvez has been onto this case since it began, as he is with all things immigration. We appreciate you joining us here from Baltimore today, and we'll be in touch. Camilo Montoya Galvez joins us now from Baltimore outside that ICE facility. Camilo, what is the current status of Abrego Garcia?
Well, according to his lawyers, Abrego Garcia is back in ICE custody in Virginia, held at the detention center there in that state because Maryland does not have any long-term ICE detention centers. And as you underscored, Ed, the Department of Homeland Security has said that this man from El Salvador is now being processed for deportation to Uganda. we reported last week that the administration had brokered an agreement with this country in East Africa so that country would take back migrants and deportees who are not their citizens. This is one of the latest third country deportation deals that this administration has been able to forge with different countries around the globe, including in Africa. And now this man is facing deportation to Africa even before his criminal trial starts next year. Because again, the only reason, Ed, that Kilmar Abrego Garcia was brought back to the U.S. in early June after months of refusal by the Trump administration was so he could face federal charges related to human smuggling. The Justice Department is alleging that he transported undocumented immigrants from Maryland to different parts of the country and from Texas to different states like Maryland. He could very well be deported before that criminal trial starts.
He could, but a judge stepped in today and said he can't go right away, right?
That's correct. A federal judge here in Maryland, agreeing with the lawsuit filed just this morning by Abrego Garcia's lawyers, halted that deportation to Uganda for the time being. However, it is very important to underscore that Abrego Garcia did cross into the U.S. illegally back in 2011 and does have an active deportation order. He has a protection from being deported to El Salvador, but technically speaking, it is possible for the administration to try to deport him to another country, but obviously that is also now being litigated by federal courts across the country.
And real quick, he's not going to Uganda, it sounds like, anytime soon, but do we know what would await him should he gets there? Is it some kind of facility they've set up? Could his family or attorney come to visit him? Is he free to move about the country? What's the status of someone who gets sent there?
It really is unclear, Ed. The Trump administration has not disclosed many details about this potential deportation to Uganda. What it has said is that Uganda is willing to accept this man in its territory. We do know that Costa Rica also offered to grant refugee status to Kilmar Abrego Garcia as part of a plea deal, but that was rejected by his attorneys.
All righty. Camila Montoya Galvez has been onto this case since it began, as he is with all things immigration. We appreciate you joining us here from Baltimore today, and we'll be in touch. I'm joined now by Maryland Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey, who represents the 4th District of the Free State and was there today when Kilmar Abrego Garcia turned himself in. Good to see you again, sir. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
As I mentioned, you were there today, this morning, at this incredible rally that was held really as the sun was coming up, and there were hundreds of people that appeared outside that facility in support of him and his family. How's his family dealing with this incredible legal and logistical whiplash that he's now facing?
Well, it's a really tough scenario for sure. I think his family, his wife in particular, is carrying a very heavy load. You know, when they bring the weight of the Department of Justice down on an individual, it can be really crushing, and especially in a scenario like this, because it was pretty much out of the blue for him and his family.
What, in your view, is wrong or illegal about his potential deportation to Uganda?
Well, the Supreme Court said he should get a day in court. And the Department of Justice, the Trump administration, seemed scared to give him one. So when he was initially sent overseas to El Salvador, they didn't want to bring him back, said they couldn't. The Supreme Court said you got to bring him back. 4th Circuit did too. Eventually they did, but they did it under the guise of charging him with federal crimes. Then they brought him back. He was brought to Tennessee. The judge there looked at the case and said, I don't know that, this is what you're saying it is. I'm going to let him go home, and I'm going to, allow him to stay there until we have the next proceedings here in Tennessee. So that judge looked and said, I don't think he's a threat to the public. I don't think he's a risk, there's a risk of flight. And that's what they've gotten the Trump administration, Department of Justice, whenever they've gone to court. They've been losing over and over again. So I think this pressure to try and send him to Uganda instead of letting him go forward with his trial reflects the fact that they're concerned they might get embarrassed if they go to trial in this case.
I know you were there today. I know you had attempted to meet with him when he was in El Salvador. I know Senator Chris Van Hollen did as well. Is there anything more members of Congress can be doing to fight for him with their congressional powers other than public appearances and speaking out? Is there something you can do to compel the Justice Department or ICE?
Well, not without Republican support. I mean, what Congress ought to be doing is making sure, for example, that the contracts that the Trump administration is agreeing to with El Salvador and apparently Uganda now to jail people out of the United States with U.S. tax dollars, make sure we're using that money in the right way, and these are the conditions that we should be using. Congress should also be looking at the billions of dollars that we're spending on the enforcement of these immigration laws. This Alligator or Alcatraz place and the one they're talking about in Texas,
Yep.
I think both of them are around $45 billion when you add them up. But also, and more importantly, I would say, the constitutional issues here. They're sending people overseas to jails that haven't committed a crime here, there, or any place else for indefinite detention in some of the most dangerous jails in the country or in the world. So I think it's a real missed moment by Congress, Republicans in Congress on the House and the Senate, and we're having to rely on the courts to make sure that there's, to some degree, the rule of law is being followed.
Do you compel Republicans when they come back next week to join the cause and say, at least let's check in on the spending?
Well, they've been reluctant to do that. They focus on moving the H.R. 1. They call it the big, beautiful bill. We think it's an ugly bill.
Right.
And, you know, the $1 trillion in tax cut and taxes that are taken away from people who had Medicaid so they can give it to people who, frankly, don't need it. You know, the $3 to $5 billion transfer to upper income people. Yeah. They're focused on that.
Let's talk about crime for a second. Obviously, there's this ongoing federal takeover of D.C., and now the president's talking about possibly doing the same thing up in Baltimore, across Maryland, raising questions about the governor, Wes Moore's stewardship of the Free State. What do you make of the ongoing takeover here? And is there anything from the federal government that Maryland could use to help fight crime?
Sure, and they've been doing it already. I was a federal prosecutor here in D.C. for 4 years in the 90s, and then I was elected for 2 terms in Prince George's County as a state DA. And we used teams together. We worked together with the feds all the time. Not the military, because they don't have the tools or the training to help with law enforcement and the weaponry that they carry. I saw them I was on the wharf last night. They're carrying, you know, semi-automatic handguns and assault weapons. And that's not what you need for civil law enforcement. They're not trained to make arrests. They're not trained to Mirandize witnesses. They're not trained in the chain of custody. They don't know about the force continuum. They don't know anything they're supposed to be doing in these kinds of cases. So they're just getting in the way and spending a lot of money. I think the governor of Maryland said it was $1 million a day.
Sounds like.
So, you know, why don't we actually bring in people, FBI, DEA, marshals, other types of law enforcement, people who are actually trained in these sorts of things, team them up with local law enforcement. So you're expanding the resources that you've got to go after these issues, which is what we frequently do. Spend the money on that. And then in addition, enforcement alone is never the answer. You need intervention, prevention programs. The reason crime's been going down in a lot of these cities like DC and Baltimore is because the Biden administration had programs like that, especially focusing on getting guns off the street. These guys are totally silent, even on ghost guns that only lawbreakers want to have ghost guns on the street. But there's 0 Republican co-sponsors for legislation to ban ghost guns.
But what I hear you saying is federal help from Maryland is fine.
Sure.
Just not of the military variety.
No, yeah, that's right.
Okay. Congressman Glenn Ivey, good to see you. I know you've had a long day.
Thanks for having me.
Stopping by.
Appreciate it.
And we'll see you again soon. Still to come here on the Takeout, lawmakers and other leaders in Illinois are calling on President Trump to keep the National Guard out of Chicago. Why the governor there says President Trump's attempting to, quote, manufacture a crisis. And the president wants to eliminate cashless bail and is attempting to end it via executive order. How could that impact our criminal justice system? Plus, Katie Miller's been a Trump loyalist spanning both administrations and was recently an aide to Elon Musk and DOGE. She joins us here to discuss her time in government and her newly launched podcast. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back. Leaders in Illinois are speaking out against President Trump's threat to deploy the National Guard to Chicago. Here a little while ago is the state's governor, J.B. Pritzker.
What President Trump is doing is unprecedented and unwarranted. It is illegal. It is unconstitutional. It is un-American.
Now, you see a smattering of Democratic leadership there behind the governor. If you know Illinois politics, you saw the lieutenant governor, its senators, other leaders. But there are other leaders beyond political leaders who are concerned about this. And one of those is Bill Daley, who joins us now. He, of course, was one of President Obama's chiefs of staff, and of course has long political ties to Chicago, as both his father and brother once served as Windy City Mayor. Bill Daley, thank you so much for joining us. I want to start by asking you, crime is down in Chicago compared to last year. How would you currently assess the state of safety there in the city?
Well, perception is reality when it comes to crime. I don't care what the numbers show. If people feel unsafe, then that has to be addressed. I live in Chicago. I go wherever I want to go. Yes, there is a crime issue. There are in most parts of the country, whether they're red states, blue states. It doesn't mean that you send in the military and soon to be the Department of War and send those members of the War Department into cities to occupy them. Your colleague earlier in the show talked about maybe this is just cover for immigration action. If that's the case, then the president ought to say, this is why we're doing it. It's not really about the crime that may or may not be happening in these cities. We have one of the greatest police departments in the country, the Chicago Police Department. They're out there, the men and women every day, protecting people, serving them, and they do a great job. Can they do better? Yes. Do they need resources? Yes. The president really wants to do something about crime in Chicago or any other city, then as the congressman said, do something about the illegal guns that proliferate America today. But nobody wants to talk about that.
Oh, at least the White House doesn't. You are, of course, well connected not only to the political scene in that city, but to the business community as well, broader society. It's been a few days of this. I imagine it's been the topic of conversation. Is there concern among business leaders or the Visitors Bureau that this could have an adverse effect on the local economy?
Yes, no doubt about it. But again, we can't be cold to the fact that there is crime that happens in Chicago. And those of us who are concerned about it want to see the police department maybe do a better job, but they're doing a great job. But to bring in the military to occupy a city and think that that is going to solve a crime problem, it may for a day or two just because they're able to blanket a neighborhood. But that's not a long-term solution to crime anywhere in America. I don't care if it's a blue city or a red city. That's not reality. And the president, I think it's a great show. It's great talking points. It's a lot of energy to be expended and not talk about other issues. But to actually solve the crime problem that happens throughout America, to think that we could send soldiers and military into every city. And it is ironic that these are just, quote, blue cities, overwhelmingly Democratic, where there is crime in cities that do happen in red states.
Right. And not only blue cities or Democratic-controlled cities, but most of the ones he's discussing also controlled by black mayors. How do you assess how the mayor and Governor Pritzker more broadly are handling this? You talk about the police force. Is there something more the political leaders can be doing?
Well, I think that both political leaders, and look at the mayor's job is the worst job in America, and having seen a father and brother do it, it's a tough job. But I think the governor's brought resources. I think the state is focused on it. The city's been focused on it. Again, the leadership of the police department, I think, is doing a good job. But we can do better, and they can do better. And I think maybe what comes out of this, though, will be that the political leadership will refocus not only on short-term solutions, but so many of these, the basis of the crime in the cities and rural America is the proliferation of illegal guns. I'm not talking about those gun owners who have every right in the world to own a gun and to use that gun in an appropriate way. But I'm talking about the illegal guns. There are millions and millions. There's more guns in America than there are people in America. And a vast majority of them are illegally owned.
Well, Bill Daley, of course, longtime Chicago-based businessman and leader, and a former White House chief of staff. Any White House chief of staff has seen just about everything. So we appreciate your perspective, and glad you were able to join us today.
Thanks, Ed. I appreciate it very much.
All righty. Take care. President Trump wants to end cashless bail nationwide. Next, we'll explain how this is partially connected to his deployment of the National Guard. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to the Takeout. Here's a look at what else we're watching this evening. Officials say at least 20 people, including 5 journalists, were killed in an Israeli missile attack on a hospital in Gaza. The Hamas-run health ministry says 1 missile hit the facility, and a second missile struck moments later as rescue crews and journalists arrived on scene. The Israeli Defense Forces say it planned to conduct an inquiry into the attack as soon as possible and added it doesn't target journalists. Also today at the White House, President Trump signed an executive order aimed at ending cashless bail. Under the order, jurisdictions that allowed accused criminals to be released without paying bail first will be barred from receiving federal grants. Here's the president explaining it all during the signing.
They kill people and they get out. Cashless bail. They thought it was discriminatory to make people put up money because they just killed 3 people lying on a street. Any street all over the country, cashless bail. We're ending it, but we're starting by ending it in D.C., and that we have the right to do through federalization.
CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cortez, fellow boothmate over there at 1600, joins us now. Nancy, good to see you. What exactly does this executive order end up doing, best we can tell?
Hey, Ed, good to see you. We are keeping the booth warm for you here at the White House. What this executive order aims to do is eliminate cashless bail in cities and states across the country by basically threatening to withdraw federal funds from states that don't get rid of this program. This is a threat that the administration has been wielding more and more frequently recently when states and cities have policies that they don't like. In this case, what President Trump says he doesn't like is the fact that people who commit crimes no longer have to put up money in order to get out of jail. A judge can just allow someone to go free without any kind of monetary payment. This is usually something that applies to nonviolent offenses. Obviously, people who are deemed violent are required generally to remain in jail awaiting trial. But they're allowed to, to go free with electric monitoring or something like that before their trial. The president argued today that because these people have no skin in the game, they go on to commit crimes again, and that cashless bail is really at the root of the crime problem here in America. But D.C.'s mayor, who has been pushing back against the president on a number of issues related to crime lately, Ed, she said that they're no stranger to cashless bail here in the district, but that what they have found has really helped prevent repeat criminal activity is that they've expanded their ability to detain people who are deemed violent, who are accused of violent crimes. Yeah. And she was skeptical that this executive order would have much of an impact.
In that same setting, the president also signed an executive order today directing the Justice Department to investigate instances of flag burning. Even though the Supreme Court ruled back in 1989 the practice is protected under the First Amendment. Let's listen first to how the president defended this executive order.
Through a very sad court, I guess it was a 5-4 decision, they called it freedom of speech. But there's another reason, which is perhaps much more important. It's called death. Because what happens when you burn a flag is the area goes crazy. If you have hundreds of people, they go crazy. You can do other things. You can burn this piece of paper. But when you burn the American flag, it incites riots.
I've never heard of someone dying because a flag was burned, but what exactly is he trying to get at with this executive order?
Well, he wants the punishments for flag burning to be increased, and he wants federal agents to go after people who burn flags at a protest. As you pointed out, Ed, this is something that the Supreme Court deemed to be free speech back in 1989, but the court is more conservative now, and the president is directing his attorney general to look for a test case so that they can try to get that ruling overturned.
All right. We'll see if they find one. Nancy Cortez, Chief White House Correspondent, CBS News. Thank you. See you soon. And we'll see you on the evening news. Coming up, Democrats are out of power, down in the polls, and low on money. So what are they to do? Well, the DNC's Vice Chairman, Malcolm Kenyatta, joins me next to answer those questions. Stay with us. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back. Leaders of the Democratic National Committee have a wee bit of work to do, let's put it that way, as they gather this week in Minneapolis for their annual summer meeting. They're out of power. They're lagging behind Republicans in most fundraising. And while a recent Gallup poll finds more Americans identify as Democrats than Republicans, similar polling has given the party its lowest ratings in modern times. Against that backdrop, we're joined by the vice chairman of the Democratic National Committee and Pennsylvania State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta, who is in Minneapolis tonight. Thank you for being with us. There's been a lot of discussion about sort of, I think as your chairman put it earlier today, winning arguments versus winning elections, and the need to focus on the big prize, which is actually convincing voters to vote for members of your party. How do you guys address that divide on tactics and strategy moving forward this week?
So let me start by making this point that I think sometimes gets missed. Not only does Donald Trump not care about the American people, he doesn't like the American people. It's why right now, as you've been talking about throughout this show, he's taking the American armed forces and not turning them against our adversaries abroad to keep Americans safe, but he's actually turning them on the American people. I start there to make this point that Democrats aren't in this to like win a pickup basketball game. We're in this to make life better for the American people. Because when we look out at this country, we actually give a damn about the farmers who I talked to in North Dakota this weekend, who are seeing the cost not only of fertilizer, but the cost of the equipment that they need go up because of this president's erratic tariffs. We give a damn about making sure safety is a reality in our communities. That's why Democrats have been talking, as many of your guests have mentioned, about ghost guns, of which I'm one of the prime sponsors of a bill to deal with ghost guns in Pennsylvania. It's why we've been investing in mental health when given the opportunity to lead. It's why we've been trying to invest in homelessness prevention. I highlight those things to make the point that it is healthy to have a party that is having a fruitful and important debate about how we win elections to have the power to make life better for the American people versus an administration that spends every single day trying to make life better for their dear leader.
And I hear you on that, and I think there are some who will have heard your answer and think, but there they go again. You ask a Democrat a question about the trouble they have, and the first thing they talk about is Donald Trump. Is there something affirmative that Democrats would do to help improve voters' lot in life right now that maybe isn't as directly tied to the president, or something that he's not talking about?
Ed, I hope if people just heard my answer that they heard me talking about the farmers that I mentioned who I met in North Dakota who are dealing with this president's erratic tariffs and Democrats' continued investment in farmers. I mean, I'm going to just stick with North Dakota because I was there for a couple of days. When North Dakota dealt with horrific storms because of the impact of extreme weather events, the former administration approved that emergency declaration overnight. This administration has still not approved an emergency declaration for one of the worst tornadoes in history. And so when you ask what do Democrats want to do, obviously what we want to do is reverse the things that this president is doing to make life worse for the American people. And so the things that are happening to families aren't happening, in a vacuum. And I think Democrats are more than self-reflective on the fact that we have to win elections. It's why we are investing and have across this entire summer in getting organizers on the ground. This is the earliest investment we have made in quote unquote, off-cycle investment in organizing that we've ever seen the Democratic Party make. It's why we're investing $1 million a month in our state parties so that they can reach out to people in their communities to talk about how we make their lives better. And it's why we've been crystal clear. We're not going to continue to be a party that allows the Republican Party to treat us in a way where we're playing checkers and they're playing Grand Theft Auto. We're going to stand up against this administration, and we are laying out an agenda every single day about community safety, about allowing our small business owners to thrive.
In our remaining seconds, yay or nay on restoring New Hampshire as the first state in the presidential primary calendar? Where do you stand on that one?
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
New Hampshire, should it go first again in the presidential primary calendar? I know that's one of the things you guys might discuss.
Well, listen, we're gonna have that conversation. I'm certainly not gonna come on here and get ahead of the Rules and Bylaws Committee. All of our states are gonna have that conversation. All of our our DNC members who are on the Rules and Bylaws Committee is gonna have that conversation with our states. But what I'm excited about is that we're gonna have some incredible nominees who are gonna be running up and down the ballot, and certainly for president, that the American people are gonna get to hear from.
All righty. Well, we'll do that over the course of the next few years, but we appreciate you being here. Good luck with your meetings this week. Malcolm Kenyatta from Minneapolis, thank you. The Trump administration's acquisition of 10% of Intel could be the first of many similar deals to come, according to new comments from the president himself. We'll have more on that in a moment. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back. President Trump says he wants more deals like the agreement announced with tech giant Intel last week. It gave the U.S. government a 10% stake in its business.
The case of Intel was interesting, but I hope I'm going to have many more cases like it. There will be other cases. If I have that opportunity again, I would do that. And then, you do have stupid people say, oh, that's a shame. It's not a shame. It's called business.
The president said the deal with Intel came out of a meeting with its CEO, which took place only days after Trump called for his resignation. Let's bring in our reporter panel. Peggy Collins is Washington bureau chief for Bloomberg News. Julia Manchester is a national political reporter for The Hill. Great to see both of you. Welcome, Peggy, here to the set for the first time. And I'm glad you're here because I gotta believe that government ownership of Fortune 500 companies is a hot topic of people who subscribe to Bloomberg News and those who represent them here in Washington. Do we have any sense of what other companies the administration might be eyeing and what the business community makes of his hunt for more deals like this?
Well, I think the business community is trying to digest this, Ed, because we were following the story and covering it day to day last week. But it is unprecedented in the sense that the government at times has come in to help American companies, but that has been at a time where there's systemic risk going on, such as in the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. This is the government stepping in at a time when that isn't going on. And the White House will say this is for national security and economic purposes. But what we're seeing is the administration use investment tools to achieve economic and foreign policy goals, and that's something new.
This aligns the president to some extent with Bernie Sanders, who over the weekend was like, this is exactly what I want to see. We're not just giving money to big corporations, but we're in essence taking a stake in them and reaping the benefits. So it's incredible to see essentially socialists and this president on board with the same idea.
Well, it's interesting. I was actually scrolling through X after this was announced earlier today, and I actually saw a Democratic operative say this is socialism. And it's ironic because we hear Republicans using that word, socialist, against Democrats in a number of elections. But I think what we've seen really with the populist wings of both parties, Ed, is this horseshoe. And they, the left and the right, when it comes to the populist wings of both parties, they sort of almost come together when it comes to some of these issues of, economics. But for this is certainly shocking to hear the president. It's just completely unusual.
Yeah. The other thing, of course, that happened today at the White House is he met with the leader of South Korea, who left without a trade deal. So this is one of the big major Asian economic powers, and they still haven't sorted out how, if at all, there will be some kind of an agreement. And that leaves much of the world economy wondering, what is the status of these agreements?
Well, that's right. And that's why we've seen so many of these foreign leaders come to Washington, because they are trying to say, hey, like with South Korea, we are key to your car manufacturing sector, your chip making, and we want to make sure that we're continuing to be economically tied. But at the same time, a lot of these trade deals are just frameworks right now. One thing I will say is the South Korean leader was very complimentary of the president today. And while he didn't walk out with a trade deal per se, he didn't walk out with a worse tariff rate. At 15%, he's aligned with Japan. And given the scope of other deals or frameworks we're seeing right now, that's not a bad situation to be in.
Fair point. But yes, he did compliment the gold trim in the Oval Office. One thing I wanted to ask you in our remaining moments, we saw today the first example of the political effects of the redistricting in Texas, as Greg Casar, who represents the Austin area, announced he's running, no longer facing the threat of a primary against fellow Democrat who had said he was going to run against him, whose name I'm now, Lloyd Doggett, right?
Doggett,
Thank you.
yes, yes.
There's so many of them, you have to remember them all, but we're paid to do that. The significance of him jumping in now and how this begins to reshape the race for the House, at least among Texas's seats.
Yeah. Well, look, last week, Lloyd Doggett said that he would not run for re-election in that seat, assuming these pass legal muster, the maps. But it was ironic because we heard Lloyd Doggett say that Greg Casar should run in the newly redrawn 35th district outside of Austin. It was ironic, though, because Lloyd Doggett was the first House Democrat, he's in his late 70s, to call for President Biden to step down last year following that debate. So a lot of Democrats were upset with him sort of trying to push Casar to run in what would have been a really tough district. Yeah.
Karma has an interesting way of working out, doesn't it? There's a song about that. Peggy Collins, Julie Manchester, thank you both for being here. Great to see you both. Coming up, I am joined by former Elon Musk aide Katie Miller, more on her new podcast for conservative moms and her time working for the world's richest man. You're watching The Takeout.
For years, I've seen that there isn't a place for conservative women to gather online. So I wanted to create that space where we have real, honest conversations with people across the political spectrum.
Welcome back. That was longtime Trump ally and former administration official Katie Miller announcing the launch of her new podcast aimed primarily at conservative women. She held a variety of roles in both Trump administrations, most recently as an advisor to DOGE. She also worked for Elon Musk in the private sector, and Katie Miller joins us here now. Great to see you. Long before all that, you were a staffer on the Hill. I remember meeting you when you first worked for Senator McSally.
It was before that, Steve Daines.
Right, and then you went on to Homeland Security. So you've definitely held a series of positions, and now you're doing this. And I know you get asked this a lot since you've announced this, but there's you, there's women like Megyn Kelly doing this, Sage Steele, Lara Trump's now doing this for Fox. Conservative, accomplished women entering this space. What does the Katie Miller podcast do that the others aren't doing?
Lara Trump, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, they all do a lot of political discussions on their shows. They cover politics from the female perspective. What I'm hoping to do is bring some more of relatable life, that window into a life that you don't often get to see. Where do they go grocery shop? How do they raise their children? What is it like, with their spouse? Or why did they go through that divorce? And what did they learn on the other side of that? To me, that's something that's missing from the conservative space, that conversation you'd have with a girlfriend over drinks, or we're not really drinking anymore, so maybe hot tea with lemon at the end of the night. Yeah. But that's what's missing, right? Life from my perspective and my friend's perspective that I don't think there's a place for right now in the many podcasts that exist.
Thousands, right? And only a few dozen that really pop. So I can understand and appreciate the challenge before you. Now, you say you want to have real, honest conversations across the political spectrum.
Yeah.
You've talked to the vice president. You're talking to Alabama Senator Britt tonight. You have plans to talk to any liberals or Democrats?
Absolutely. And I haven't, to be clear, screened for political affiliation. When you start something new and you ask someone to take a chance on an untested product, you go to your friends first, right? Who are going to support you? And it's been very fascinating to see who have supported me. And there's a lot of friends who I'm very grateful for their support in this next endeavor. But coming up, there are a lot of amazing, accomplished women and men, whether that be from business, tech, scientists, you name it. There's a lot of people who have said, yeah, I'll take the chance with you and let's have these conversations, because I think for too long, there's only that 1 minute you see on TikTok and Instagram of a mom's life of how she parents, what does bath time look like, how does she, what education does she choose for her child? And I don't think what happens in the other 23 hours and 59 minutes of the day, they're not real, it's not honest. Some days it's awful. Some days the mom is crying at the end of the night. I know I am when my kids have just run me ragged and it's been a long day. And I want to show that part of my life because it's not always perfect.
Yeah. There are going to be people who see this and go, okay, she wants to talk about the life of people who are in the public sphere, about finding a way to balance life with family and work. But they're going to think to themselves, this was someone who was speaking out on behalf of DOGE, which, for good or for ill, it was a promise fulfilled by the president, no doubt, disrupted much of the federal government, and disrupted the lives of hundreds of thousands of federal employees, many of whom loved working where they were, either because they're subject matter experts on it, or they liked the flexibility, right? There was telework, or there was the option to work from home or to go in, and they don't necessarily have that anymore. If their balance has been disrupted because of what went on with DOGE, and you were part of it, what would you say to those people who would think, she wants to talk about that, but she's disrupted mine?
Sure. Less than 1% of the federal workforce was terminated as a result of the actions of President Trump or DOGE. The reality is the bluster and the public perception is not the reality. Because of people in the main, and I would say in the legacy media, that's just not the lived reality of many people in the federal workforce. What you've seen across the networks is the fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the workforce who have spoken out. What you often see is protesters who are not reflective and who are not in the federal workforce speaking out for the federal workforce. It's very similar to now what you see of the D.C. protests. It's out-of-state people flying in to protest what most of the D.C. public supports, which is safe streets, safe community, and a safe place to be able to take your kids to see our beautiful capital. That's missing. And for anyone who wants to tune into my podcast, what you'll see is this real conversation. Take on hard topics, ask tough questions. I'm all for it. Because honestly, what I experienced working for President Trump and Elon Musk is two great, incredible men who have a passion for supporting our country, for making our country a better place to live and work for my children and your children.
Terminated 1%. The voluntary buyouts was a larger percentage. And
Sure.
I spent some time with some of those people who were happy to take it, others who contemplated it. So I get that. Terminated versus voluntarily
Voluntary departures means you've selected to take the most generous buyout of any probably private company you'll ever find, which was, I think, 8 months of paid leave to go on vacation if you want, to look for another job if you want, while you were still paid for by the federal government. I don't know any private place of employment that does that. Do you?
I do not. But then again, the federal government's a unique employer. You mentioned the president, Elon Musk. Do you know the last time they talked?
I don't. I actually haven't communicated with either of them about when they've last spoken with each other. I know they're both doing very well. President Trump, I see him often. I still speak with Elon often. We are still good friends.
How's he doing?
He's great. He's launching a rocket today.
Well, yes, he is. What's the biggest misperception about him, having been up close with him as much as you were?
I think he is very dedicated, and he is a very great employer who cares a lot about the lives of employees. If you go to Starbase, Texas, which is why it's on my brain, they're launching a rocket, hopefully tonight if the weather call is good. And you'll see that he's built an amazing place for his employees to be able to have a sole focus on just going to Mars. And I really would encourage you or any viewer out there to take a chance and go down there. It is beautiful. It is a one-of-a-kind place to make it a great place for employees.
All right. Katie Miller, thank you for being here. It's Katie Miller Podcast. Check it out. That is it for the Takeout today. Stick around. The Daily Report starts like right now.